12 stages of consciousness in horror movies. With the third tier, there's almost nobody at those stages in the world, let alone in the Hollywood filmmaking system. As we go to violet and ultraviolet and clear light, the reason that a lot of stage models, including spiral dynamics and including whole maths level system, which is basically Aquil integral without those top three stages, is because they don't really exist in real life. They're just recognized by Wilber and others as being potentials that could be realized in real life. So it kind of stands to reason that sooner or later, societies and cultures and technologies will develop around the psychic, subtle, causal, and non-dual understandings. I really need to be clear about all that because I think it's a real problematic comprehension that I'm helping to generate with my Stages of Consciousness videos. If you've ever had, or if you're having now, or if you're aware of or familiar with, or some of these states of consciousness, that's not the same thing as being at that stage. Practically nobody is at the top three stages. That's an important concept. Although a lot of individuals have kind of state intuitions of them, a lot of people have state structures that they're capable of entering those realms or those states at will, but it isn't what they do with their time. It isn't how they feel. It isn't who they are most of the time. So it's not their center of gravity, and it kind of can't be yet. In common, I'm just trying to popularize this lingo. So in common speech, it's okay to say, oh man, yeah, I spent 2 weeks in the violet. That's fine. Subtle would probably be better. It's really important just that we know this, that those top three colors really pertain to something that doesn't really exist in the world, except possibly, arguably, in little tiny pockets where it's occurring at certain lines and not others. And you have to really understand lines too. You can have a violet stage in your cognitive line, which means you understand these things right now. That doesn't mean that you feel them right now, that you value them right now. It doesn't mean that that's what your career is. It doesn't mean that that's how you relate to people. So there's all these different lines of development that can be at any stage. They generally are close to one another. They generally sort of, there's an overall trend in a human being. So as you experience more and more of these subtle and causal states, and those get solidified into state structures or permanent traits, then you have the capacity for more and more of your lines to reach up into those stages too. And that's where we would start to call an overall person violet, ultraviolet, clear light. Very difficult. There's a lot of forces acting against you, a lot of stabilizing forces in self-culture and nature fighting against you being at that stage. So in general, if you're talking to me, you're not at any of those stages. I am trying very hard to be teal, which is like a little over halfway up this sucker, you see. And that means, to me, thinking it, feeling it, valuing it, doing it most of the time, in self, in culture, in nature, all of those things. That's what it is to, like, quote unquote, be a stage or be at a stage. And of course, it oscillates. You have different lines at different stages. And so it's all a very generalized picture. This is why it's kind of goofy, I might say, to try and go around pegging everybody at these stages. It's like this is like the most complicated topic. It's like the nature of reality. And it's very much a matter of intuition and guesswork. So I'm not trying to make some simple 20-question assessment where if you answer it correctly, you score stage 12. If you are experiencing blissful rapture and devotion to God while being crucified for a long time, I might put you up somewhere around ultraviolet or clear light. It's a really uncommon thing. Okay, and I would point out too, as we get up to ultraviolet now, from here, story, and really in violet, story is becoming less and less meaningful. Story is sort of a first tier phenomenon. The first tier organizes itself largely according to story. The ego is a story. Your concept of what society is very often a story. This is why we love movies and books and film. You know, this is why we love media so much. This is why we like consuming stories, because it relates to us as storied beings. But starting around indigo and the whole third tier, it's less and less about a story. It's more and more about a perception that I am this witness, this consciousness, this awareness that is transcendent to the notion of story, and that all the things, the villains and the tragedies that are occurring are just a piece of that story that I am privy to. I, not as ego, but I as awareness, or in the lower ones, I as psyche. So with indigo, we're becoming ego aware. With violet, we're becoming psyche aware, or identifying as psyche. With the ultraviolet causal, we're identifying more as awareness itself, or a sort of witness as ground of being, as the source of all that is occurring, the fundamental. And this is characterless, storyless, prior to time, no space, no self. So really hard to come up with a horror movie, but again, we have these cheats because we can look at the storytelling, we can look at the villain, we can look at the fear, we can look at the director, we can look at the writer, right? So for ultraviolet, I chose Martyrs. This is a French film that my psychotic ex, wonderful woman, but screw loose with relationships, I'm sorry to say, a wonderful person. She loved inflicting, making me watch just terrible movies, terrible in any way you can imagine, you know, from being awkward to being badly made to being boring. And she really wanted me to watch Martyrs. That was like the coup de grace. But she ended up cheating on me multiple times before we could do that together. But I did watch it recently, as I indicated in another video that I made. And it actually, I kind of intuited that this would be the case based on the title and what she had told me about it. It's kind of the best example of stage 11 that I can come up with. So stage 11 is basically enlightenment in Theravada. It's realizing that your true nature, your original face, is just like all sentient consciousness itself. It is the simple feeling of being. It's the background upon which everything occurs. It is a characterless, formless, unmanifested source of creation. I'm going to spoil it for you because it fucking doesn't. You just don't watch this movie. Lots of brutality towards women. It's just an unpleasant experience, and it's an artsy film. But it's kind of okay. It's not like poorly made or anything, but it's just a really unpleasant experience. And well, gee, I don't know, if you really like horror, I mean, go for it. But so the story is about a sort of cult. They're kind of like Scientology, like they have resources, they're very well organized and everything, and they have this sort of secret mission. And the mission is that they kidnap women and they inflict the most horrible torture on these people possible, because the idea is they're sort of trying to crucify them, you know, to make them into like a Jesus. Like some people, when they experience torture and suffering, they will transcend. And so they're trying to kind of scientifically study these victims and try and get the victim to the point of transcendence. And sure enough, at the end of the movie, the final victim does attain a causal state and is radically free of all that is happening as she's being skinned alive. And in the film, the way it's depicted is her eyes kind of turn like cloudy and black, and they look like little worlds or something. And that's what you look for. That's the look. And so she experiences pure transcendence through suffering, which is kind of fascinating. I'm making it sound interesting. Maybe it is. I don't know. So I won't tell you what happens after that. You can, if you do watch it, I'll leave a little bit of it unmentioned. But yeah, this is a fear of the work it would take. This is a fear of what it would take to get to that causal state, to fully enlighten oneself, that you would have to give up everything. You know, comfort is given up to the point of brutal suffering, horrible torture, and the self is utterly abandoned to where she's just taken it. She's not fighting it. She's not hoping. There's nothing left of her. She's gone. And so in this particular story, that is her enlightenment. And now the good news is what the Buddha sort of was teaching us is you don't have to do that to get there, that there's a sort of middle way. And indeed, in Vajrayana, there's sort of an even leftward way, you know, where you can get there through pleasurable things, through things that are generally recognized as not being sort of spiritually virtuous, or an abandonment of ego, body, flesh. But as on the other hand, it's an embracing of those things, of desire and the body and the ego. And so this starts to get us into a notion of sort of non-duality. So CLEARLIGHT, there's not a story like Martyrs, but I was able to think of something that roughly makes sense, all right? Bear with me. Invasion of the Body Snatchers. So my reasoning here is Invasion of the Body Snatchers is about, like, it's the pod people story. It's about aliens come to Earth and they take over humanity by entering their minds and in completely eradicating any sense of individuality or ego and making everybody into a sort of collective mind. Well, in a way, that's sort of like CLEARLIGHT. If everyone could just see into one another and could truly understand one another and truly give up oneself to serve the greater good, that would sort of be like non-dual awareness, where I am entirely a vehicle of the creator, or I am entirely a vehicle of consciousness or awareness itself, or the ground of being. I am creativity incarnate. I am the Big Bang still going. Now, this isn't just a thought that you have. It requires you to have access to all those states all the time, psychic, subtle, causal, non-dual, as well as just, you know, whatever stages of consciousness manifest in your lines currently. So in a way, your Tommy Knockers or your Invasion of the Body Snatchers pod people, or your Borg even from Star Trek, that is a sort of non-dual collective. It's a sort of egoless, utterly transcendent of body, and the consciousness is like purely collective. It's purely coming from outside of the individual. And in this case, that's the villain, that's the fear, that's what we're trying to run away from. So as the planet is slowly conquered by this, it's seen as like a tragic bad ending. Well, how do we know? Like, what happens next? What happens when the planet's totally taken over? Like, the whole galaxy or universe lives in perfect harmony as they colonize all the planets and work together to do goodness knows what, free of ego, free of war, free of conflict. I mean, you had to break a few eggs. It stops at nothing. It has no restraint. It has no compassion. So this is, and they're humans. They look like people, even though they're sort of like animated dead bodies by whatever mechanism the story supports. So I hope that was a pretty decent overview, and please stay tuned for our podcasts upcoming with James and Danielle. Hopefully talk more about the Aquil or Aquilolatus, as I call it, theory, the integral theory of everything. Music, you know, you can do it with anything. These are just stages of consciousness. So anything that consciousness produces can be broken up into these stages. And so far, I don't see anyone else doing this. So it's kind of my thing. And I love that about it. I'm kind of wanting to jump the gun. I'm wanting to do this, you know, accelerate this, because I'm worried like other people will start doing it better than me. That's certainly a possibility. I don't do it that well. But it is kind of this idea that I came up with, and stuff that people on the internet usually talk about, but with this backbone of Aquil or stages of consciousness, altitudes. And so in that sense, it is to me a little bit more nutritious, a little bit more sort of in a right livelihood, even though this isn't livelihood. It's a little bit more educational, and I feel like I'm kind of doing good in the world just based on, you know, my own slant on this. I think that people ought to learn about these stages of consciousness in whatever way possible. And if I can make that more digestible by talking about the things that people are actually interested in, well, it's my pleasure to do so. I absolutely have been doing this my entire life, honestly, and to be sharing this with you now is quite a pleasure for me. So I hope that this does take off. Please, like, subscribe, share this with your friends. You can see it so clearly once you learn these stages. You can see how, like, every piece of fiction you consume is largely expressing a particular altitude, and they totally don't know they're doing it. It's just because these are stages of consciousness. This is the nature of reality. Now that we've really spent a lot of time and we've brought a lot of attention to these stages of consciousness, now we can start to kind of play around with them a little bit more. And I look forward to doing that. This is something I've wanted to do from the very beginning. I hope you stay tuned, and I hope you join us on our Discord. And I look forward to your comments. I'm just trying to get Aquil out there. That's awesome. That's beautiful. But, just number one for me is to produce the content, to write it, to produce it, to make it, to put it out there. Namaste and thank you. I've been doing this for probably about 2 years now, and I've loved every second of it. It's been full of twists and turns. I have come to really trust and love the integral theory audience. I couldn't have gotten to this place wherever, whether it's a high place or a low place, that's anyone's call. But I'm happy with it. I'm grateful. I'm satisfied. I feel abundant. And I just want to keep building. I want to keep growing. I want to do this more seriously with more of my time and be able to devote myself to really living these higher stages and states of consciousness, to create a future that you can be a part of and that I can be a part of, that is in line with my values of integrity, development, and spirituality. I'm just trying to dream this thing into being